Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for attending the very first in our Erwin Mitchell new series of virtual events. And thanks in particular for battling through these challenging times to join us. My name is Vicky Brackett and I'm the CEO of our business, Erwin Mitchell. And I'm going to be joined today by a panel of experts who will walk us through some of the issues and solutions that we are currently discussing with our clients in relation to the impact on both work and home life in the light of the pandemic. We're also going to be joined by Erwin Mitchell's Chief People Officer, Susanna Bulevi, in a guest slot. We've asked Susanna to share our experience at Erwin Mitchell of supporting colleagues and ultimately clients at this time and what's changing at Erwin Mitchell in response to our new world, and perhaps also to just give us some thoughts on her own personal reflections and learnings as a people leader in this environment. But to kick us all off, I'm going to hand over first to our Group CEO, Andrew Tucker, and Andrew's going to set the scene and explain just very briefly how we're supporting our clients, our colleagues, and our communities, and attempting to try to always be one step ahead. Andrew.
Thank you, Vicky, and very good morning, everybody. So our purpose in this, the first of a series of virtual events that we'll host over the weeks to come, is to make ourselves available to you and to assist where we can in navigating our way together through this global tragedy. At another moment, of course, we're all struggling with what this means for our families, our friends, and our colleagues in terms of health, but also now financial insecurity is coming to the forefront. So our focus today is around people, supporting you at work and at home. And whilst we're lawyers and advisors here at Erwin Mitchell, we also have a business to run ourselves as well. So there are some 3,000 people who work together at Erwin Mitchell across the UK. And that means that we face exactly the same challenges as you all. Our focus has been and will continue to be our colleagues and our clients, first and foremost, their well-being, both physical and mental. And we are also reflecting carefully on our contribution to maintaining well-being in the communities around the places where we live and work. And of course, we're also now very concerned about the adjustments that we will have to make to meet the economic challenges ahead. We've already moved 2,600 of our people to home working, which has been an extraordinary experience. And there are, of course, other very immediate consequences of the fight against COVID-19 in relation to all of us. So we're here to share with you our experiences and our thinking around those issues. Over to you, Vicky.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And I think it's really true to reflect that we're just united by an extraordinary environment at the moment that none of us have ever seen. So we are all finding our way. I am going to, for the first time, chair a panel virtually. So we'll see how that goes. And I'm just delighted that I've got some of our best experts who are dealing with these issues every single day for a variety of clients. So I'm really hopeful you'll get a lot of value out of the conversation we're about to have. So I am joined today by a panel of experts. First of all, Sibylla Steiner, who's a partner in our national employment team and also a member of our international strategy. Martin Jenkins, who's a partner in our national pensions team, and Zara Pabani, a partner in our national family team. So thank you all for joining me this morning. I'm going to invite you as a panel to talk with me about the impacts that you're seeing, everyone dealing with the situation and working in this new environment. And also, I think, beyond work, home life and how everybody's managing that new balance of family and working environments merging perhaps more uncomfortably than we would all want. And also perhaps helpfully share some of our emerging solutions. I don't think we have all of the answers, but we're certainly starting to see some trends in answering some of our clients' questions. Thank you to people on the WebEx this morning for submitting questions in advance. We have looked through all of those, and what we're going to do is we're going to frame this session using some of those questions. We're then going to hand over to Susanna as I talk for our sort of guest speaker slot, back to a more general Q&A session at the end, where we'll try and mop up all of the other questions that you've asked online throughout the session. So I'm going to start immediately by going to the panel. And Sibylla, I think it's probably very fair to say that the government, in its desire to protect our workers, has created a series of questions almost unprecedented in volume, unique in content, and it's kept your team extremely busy for the past couple of weeks. And many of the questions, perhaps unsurprisingly, that we have received online over the last couple of days in advance anticipation of this session has been around furloughing of employees, a word I don't think I'd ever heard before the 20th of March, under the new coronavirus job retention scheme that the government introduced earlier this month. Just to kick us off, Sibylla, it would be really helpful, I think, to just get an overview of some of the key aspects that the clients and the people on this session have been asking about, and perhaps just very simply starting with, what does furloughing actually mean?
Yes, thank you very much, Vicky. As you said, the government announced the coronavirus job retention scheme on the 20th of March, and what this scheme is aimed at doing is to, first of all, prevent employees from being made redundant, and that employers can keep employees despite the fact that they can't be working because of the coronavirus crisis, and that employees will be paid a certain amount of their salary while they're being furloughed. So which employees can be furloughed? It's got to be employees who were on the payroll on the 28th, or actually this year, the 29th of February, because we had a leap year. It can be full-time employees, part-time employees, employees who work flexibly, or employees who work on who are on zero-hour contracts. It can also be employees of agencies who can't work because of the coronavirus crisis. I think one of the main questions, or one of the important questions that we have received is, can we also put people on the furloughing scheme who work reduced hours? And the question to that is no. Only employees can be put on the scheme who cannot, because of the crisis, provide any work at all, and who would otherwise have been made redundant.
So, Sibylla, does that mean, just to cut in there, does that mean then that we almost have to have a sort of formal redundancy case before furloughing can happen, or is it a bit less formal than that?
That is a good question, and there isn't a definitive answer for that. The question becomes particularly relevant where the employer is looking at putting more than 19 employees on furlough onto the scheme. And in that context, the question arises as to whether there has to be a collective consultation prior to that, and whether the Secretary of State has to be notified. Now, the reason why this question comes up is that in order to put employees on furlough, the employer really needs the consent of the employees to do that, because it is a fundamental change of the employment contract, and that cannot be done unilaterally. I think what also should be mentioned is that the job retention scheme, and I think in general the COVID-19 crisis, does not mean that employment laws just go away. Unless there is legislation to the contrary, normal employment laws and protection do apply. So therefore, employers can't really, coming back to putting people onto furlough, force the employee to do that if he or she does not want to be put onto the furloughing scheme.
And I think that's been a theme that's come up actually with quite a lot of clients that kind of have the normal employment law just been thrown out of the window, but actually that just stays as is, and this has kind of been put on top, and it's interpreting that within the context of the existing employment legislation, isn't it, I think, at the moment?
Exactly. Another question in this context is, how do we, if we don't need to furlough all of the employees because the business is still running and we need certain employees but maybe not others, how do we decide which employees are we going to be putting on furlough and which ones not? Again, in that context, discrimination rules need to be considered, and probably best advice is to look at groups of employees and apply criteria one would apply when it comes to redundancy selection, for example.
Have you seen any kind of sort of pragmatic steps being taken with clients just to, you know, give people a flavour of practically some of the things they could think about when selecting? Because I think selection must be quite a tricky task, and we're having to do it pretty quickly, aren't we? And we weren't ready for it. It wasn't something we were planning in.
Exactly. I think the most important aspect there is that employers need to be seen to be acting reasonably. To act reasonable is the sort of magic word for employment law and HR relations anyway, and I think it does apply in this situation as well. One possibility with regard to furloughing is potentially to rotate groups of employees. That seems to be possible under the furloughing scheme. So that, say, one group, the minimum period of time for furloughing is 3 weeks. So that maybe one can have one group of employees to do similar work to furlough for 3 weeks, and then another group to furlough for the next 3 weeks. That's potentially a possibility.
So practically, because we have had a specific question on rotation, so practically that would work that, let's say you had a team of 10, 5 may go off for the minimum 3-week furlough period, come back in and be replaced by the other 5 going off for their minimum 3-week furlough. So can you keep furloughing people?
Yeah, it looks like it is possible to put employees into and out of the furloughing scheme. However, as I said, the minimum period of time is those 3 weeks.
That's helpful, thank you. I think the other question, just a sort of similar question aligned to that, Sibylla, perhaps to cover off, is impact of holidays and bank holidays. So again, I think we're having some fairly technical questions around the holidays and the bank holidays and how that works when people are furloughed and how we manage that. What are we seeing there, and what's our thinking around those sorts of questions?
Yes, again, it's not in there isn't guidance from the government or full guidance from the government, but what our view is at the moment is, first of all, that holidays will accrue during a period of furloughing, and however, that you can't take holidays while you are in a furloughing period. Now, we are going to have the Good Friday and Easter Monday, and then also the May bank holidays coming up. So what we are advising in that context at the moment is that employers should cancel those bank holidays and declare and agree with the employees that they are not holidays, because it would interrupt the following period. And at the moment, the view is you can't take holidays during the following period.
So that has to be done by agreement, does it? And what you mean by cancelling is agreeing with the employee that's not part of their holiday entitlement, and does that accrue for later on if they come back into the business?
I mean, most employment contracts, I would say that employees are entitled to take holiday or that have holidays at bank holidays. Yeah. So the employer should notify the employees that those bank holidays will not count as holidays, and that doesn't mean that they will fall away. So they will accrue and they can be taken at a later time. And we just had a change in the working time regulation when it comes to carrying over of holidays. And the current position there is that the first 4-week basic holidays now can be carried over if they can't be taken during this year because of the coronavirus crisis into the next 2 leave years. And the employer can only say that that then can't be possible to take if there is a good reason not to. What will be regarded as a good reason, we don't know at this point in time.
Okay, so workers being given that opportunity to take that leave into subsequent holiday years if they aren't able to take it.
Yes, the sort of the 4 weeks basic holiday. Yes,
that's helpful, Sibylla. I think we've got lots more. We'll come back to that, I think, at the Q&A. I'm just going to slightly switch tack, if I might, at the moment. And Martin, perhaps to come over to you as one of our sort of pensions experts. I'm afraid I'm going to have to stick with some furlough-related issues, again, not surprisingly, because some of our guests and many of our clients, I think, are asking us about how pension schemes are impacted, particularly by this furlough scheme. And I think in particular the auto-enrolment contributions, sort of employer and employee contributions. Is that something that you can perhaps provide some clarification and maybe highlight any other points you're seeing being raised by clients?
Yeah, thanks very much, Vicky. I mean, the focus of the government has been on the furlough scheme and how that works, and the pension aspects, not surprisingly, a subsidiary. Some of the initial commentary within the pension industry was more that the government guidance provided more questions than answers. I think that's a little unfair. The basics for what an employer should do are pretty simple. There is cover for 80% of the level of contributions, and if an employer chooses to make up that difference in line with the furlough scheme, it won't be able to claim a grant for that balance. So if it pays the extra 20% of contributions, but the normal auto-enrolment contributions will be supported based on that 80% and the cash limits that are set out in the furlough scheme. So the pensions aspect is very much subsidiary to the furlough scheme. There's lots of detail on that and not much about pensions.
and what's the view at the moment on whether people can actually opt out of auto-enrolment during this period? Because obviously we're seeing quite a lot of, I mean, I think the government priority is making this easy for businesses, workers, you know, trying to put a lot of support in there. And I understand your point about it feeling a bit complicated, but I think one of the things people might want to do at a time like this, perhaps opt out. What are the options there? Yeah,
there's already a formal opt-out arrangement, so an employee can choose to say, the auto-enrolment, the clue's in the title, you're automatically in the pension plan unless you choose to come out. The process for coming out was deliberately made a bit bureaucratic and difficult, trying to encourage the staff to stay in. But there is an opt-out process and it can be applied. There is also an informal kind of recognition already, because the auto-enrolment scheme applies to so many businesses that hadn't previously had to deal with pensions, that if people want informally to agree to reduce contributions or not pay for a period and then resume, that as long as an employer has got good records of that, an employer's not going to sue its staff for contributions that are due. You know, so there's already an informal a recognition that informal arrangements will be supported, but there is a formal opt-out process as well, and there's an online form to allow the staff to opt out.
Okay, and I think just a related issue, just on life insurance cover and whether that applies, and maybe Sibylla, benefits generally when people are furloughed, whether those apply. I don't know, Martin, from a life insurance point of view, does that continue to apply to?
Yeah, I've had a bit of a focus on this simply because if you get your auto-enrolment contributions slightly wrong and then have to tidy up, it's not ideal, but it can be done. It happens quite often, actually. You can't backdate life insurance if somebody dies and they're not covered. So checking with your insurer, either via your broker or advisor, or direct with your insurer, are we still on cover for all the staff, including those on furlough, both in terms of whether the policy term covers a pandemic and also whether furloughed staff are covered. And that's an insurer confirmation point, but simple to do and but really important.
Really important, yeah. And benefits generally, Sibylla, what's the position on that? Do we know?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself again.
Okay.
When it comes to calculating what is wages in order to calculate 80%, it is clear that things like commissions and bonuses will not be included in that. So that will definitely not be covered when it comes to calculating what to be paid to a furloughed employee.
Okay, helpful, thank you. We just had one question that has come through, which I think just before we move on to Zara, that if someone's start date was prior to the 28th of February, I think is the magic number, but they were on the payroll in March, are they eligible for furlough?
Yes. So the answer to that is yes.
Yes, thank you. That's great. Thank you, Sibylla. Sorry, Martin, there was actually one other thing I think it's just worth covering off with you before we move off the pensions aspect. Slightly different, moving away from furlough for a second, but I think quite important. We obviously act for a large number of pension managers and trustees. I think for them, particularly in the volatile markets we're finding ourselves in, that there are specific issues that are arising. What can they do in this period? What sort of advice are we giving them practically in terms of their duties in this quite difficult investment period?
No, absolutely. And I mean, the UK, compared with what I guess we would now regard as our former EU partners, has the largest funded company pension arrangements by far. The largest single UK arrangement is bigger than the whole of Europe's private sector arrangements put together. So at any one time, about half the value of the stock market's pension fund money. To say it's been volatile is a bit of an understatement. It's hugely volatile. And again, you take that sort of turbulent period and you say, as an employer, what are the key things to be aware of? Well, the key things to be aware of are, have you had a message from whoever is managing the funds? That might be a third-party investment manager. It might be an arrangement such as People's Pension or Nest that are handling auto-enrollment sums for lots of staff. Have you heard from them, and are there any communications you can share with staff to reassure them that somebody's on top of this, monitoring and doing their best to manage? And secondly, anyone who's about to make a benefit decision, so they're about to transfer out of the market because they're transferring their pension or they're about to retire, how's that going to be managed? For those decisions that are coming up for people about to retire or where they're making changes, ensuring that your advisors, your brokers, whoever's managing the pension plan has answers as to how that's going to be managed, taking money out of the market and changing it into cash because somebody wants to retire. So those are the simple messages.
And I think, key message that came out of that was sort of information and keeping people updated and informed. And I think, Sibylla, the same challenge arises with the furloughed employees. I mean, it's arising constantly every day, obviously keeping everybody updated, informed on a very remote strategy basis. But when people are furloughed, presumably very important to be in the loop and, constantly receiving communication from the business. So are clients doing that? Are they sort of seeing the pragmatic ways of keeping in touch with those clients, those employees that are furloughed?
Yes, definitely. And I think, Vicky, as you say, communication is absolute key. It's key in any event all the time anyway, but I think in the circumstances we are finding ourselves in at the moment, it definitely is. And in particular, again, as you mentioned, because things are changing and employees want to know what's happening, what are my rights, what will I get, what will I not get. So it is of vital importance to stay in contact and communicate with employees to tell them what's going on.
That's great. And I think the communication team, Sarah, finally will bring you into the conversation as one of our family law experts. I think communication has certainly been, looking at it from my own perspective, one of the major challenges going forward. And the situation is obviously generating interest around the impact on employers and employees, but clients we're seeing are just adapting constantly to new ways of working and incorporating new ways of family life. And I'm sure in your practice, you're seeing lots of new issues or issues being seen through a slightly different lens as people spend much more time together as a family in isolation and not able to access the workplace and see colleagues on a regular basis. So it'd be really interesting, if you don't mind, to hear from you about a couple of things that our clients are grappling with that you and your family law colleagues are helping to navigate, if that's okay.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Vicky, and good morning, everyone. Great to have so many people on board this morning, actually. So the things that I am seeing from clients at this moment in time that we're seeing nationally in the team, two issues. One, if clients have been going through divorce proceedings or were just starting them or were coming to the end of them and they were dealing with financial settlements, all of a sudden we've had to pause or rethink, because financial settlements can be a little dangerous in the current environment. Because, for example, if one spouse was going to pay a lump sum to another spouse, but they can't afford it anymore, they've lost their income, or they're about to be furloughed, or their income is to be reduced, or their business assets have gone massively depreciated, they might not be able to afford to do the deal anymore. That's one thing that we're seeing massively about asset valuations and pensions. Everything, falling. How can you do your financial deal in your divorce proceedings? That's financial.
Are people coming to you to renegotiate that? How's that?
They are. Because they basically say, I can't do it. We agreed this deal and I can't do it anymore. So what are we going to do? So, and offers that we've made to settle have been pulled. So we're specifically looking at all our cases in that way and advising people on that, or people who have been negotiating and trying to do settlements direct, which can be a great thing to do. You can save money, you're amicable, you do it direct, but now they're struggling with it all. So we're advising. But also another issue that's really live for people at this moment in time is seeing your children. If you're separated parents and the free movement of children between households, there's been specific guidance on this from the government. You can go and pick up your kids. It's not just about having one walk a day. If you need to go pick up your kids, drop off your kids, that has got to happen. Children are struggling as much as the adults are in this environment. And we've got to make sure that we're making them a focus and that they're seeing the people, their parents, their loved ones that they need to see. Of course, there are exceptions in that, in terms of isolation and health issues, but that is something that we are seeing a lot as well. So those are the two kind of legal, technical aspects that we're seeing a lot of. But Vicky, something that, I think is really important to talk about this morning. Pre-COVID, and we're going to say that these days, aren't we, people? Pre-COVID, during COVID and post-COVID. Pre-COVID, I would liaise a lot with HR directors about their employees and say to them, if your employees are going through tough times at home, they are not going to be effective employees. So make sure, if you're aware that they are going through tough times in their relationships or with children, that they are signposted to people like me and my team, because we can give them help, advice and support. Well, that rings true even more now. If you're furloughing staff, the people that you have got, we need to make sure they're okay, because even in the best of relationships, me and my husband, I would say we're tight. I might be a divorce lawyer, people, but I'm all about the love. We are tight in our relationship. I've argued every day with him. So this is going to test even the best of relationships. So what can we do to help our employees who right now are struggling in their family units, in their family teams? Because we think a lot about our employees and an employment team. So, for example, I myself, I'm having a daily call with my team, touch base. Are you okay? What's the spread of work? What are the clients doing? Who do we need to help? Who do we need to reach out to? But you know what else I'm doing? I am saying to them, how is it at home? What's going on? How are you? I'm identifying the vulnerable people. I'm giving them separate calls. I'm talking to clients and contacts and colleagues and employees about coaching, about counselling, about how to help you reorganize your life at home. Even those strong relationships that I'm talking about, Vicky, you still need to do date night at home with your husband. You need to make sure you're both okay for your mental health, for your sanity, giving yourself some, people at home at the moment, they're shift working, even within their own households, they're shift working. Fathers looking after kids in the morning, mothers doing it in the afternoon. When are you getting your me time? When are you getting your downtime? Let's think about that. Let's think about how we push that in. And if you are struggling or employees are struggling and they need help, signpost them to us. Counselling, coaching, Relate, all these organisations are still available and we can help you get help. And we can help you, even if you're doing team calls. Do you want a coach to come on and speak in your team calls? We've got a book of people of contact we can help signpost.
And I suppose, Zara, on that, I mean, that again, it's that communication scene, isn't it? And mental health is a massive issue. I mean, it's been posted constantly in the media. And absolutely, I can sense that we are feeling that that real strain on all of our personal lives. I have to say, in preparing for this, I didn't think I was going to talk about date nights, but very happy to go there. And I think that importance of, really having those close relationships at home and having someone to talk to, but recognising our employees could be going through a fairly difficult time, and financial stress does bring all those pressures that you've talked about. And it's great to think about, I think, the Irwin Mitchell team as that slightly holistic package we can put around all of our clients who are maybe business owners or, high flyers within different businesses, but they are actually individuals with that home life going on. And I certainly know that juggling Key Stage 3 physics and maths with my role is not the easiest.
Well, Vicky, isn't it interesting? Now, you're not just a mum or a dad or a parent or a husband or a wife. You're a teacher. You're the cleaner. You're everything in your home. We've got to be everything now. And that's really, it is really, really tough. And the other thing is the leaders in the business, those of us. I mean, I feel for HR directors now and HR advisors, because that is such a stressful role that you're in right now. And don't underestimate what personal support you need, and reach out. You're right, Vicky. We are a holistic firm. We are all about our clients, our communities. And, our clients and communities, they trust us to give them that full all-round support, and they need it now more than ever.
I think if we bring that together, I think just remembering that our colleagues, our clients, and everyone we work with within the community have all got teams at work, but they've actually also got evolving teams now at home, and both of those need to be nurtured. And I think that leads us very nicely into our guest speaker slot, Susanna, if I may pass over to you. If we just pause the panel there, we'll come back to some questions at the end. Susanna is our Chief People Officer at Irwin Mitchell, and obviously from front line in terms of dealing with some of the people issues that we've just been talking about, not only as part of the team looking at our own plans for staff and how we handle them and manage them and support them through this period, but also some of the techniques and practical solutions that we've been employing. So Susanna, I think, first of all, if you don't mind, it would really help our guests to understand how Irwin Mitchell, just at high level, is living through COVID-19 and all that it brings.
Thank you, Vicky, and good morning, everybody. And like Sarah said, I'm really glad that we are talking to you today. And from my perspective, I'm talking as an HR practitioner and as a leader, so very much a practitioner angle to the conversation that we're having today. And so the first area in terms of how we're living through the coronavirus times, terrible times in Irwin Mitchell, I guess my first observation is that our purpose, together we navigate life's up and down. It's never been more meaningful, and it's never been more real in our organization. So our teams are working really, really hard to adapt to the new ways of working from home, to continue to support our clients, whilst at the same time looking after our colleagues and looking after our communities. And so in terms of the way we're looking after our colleagues, again, Zara and Vicky and the rest of our colleagues today on the call have mentioned a number of things that we're doing. We're working on three elements. First, safety, absolute safety of our colleagues, ensuring that they have all of the access to the information, the latest information through our website on coronavirus, so that they know and they practice and they absorb the guidelines from the government, the safety guidelines for the government, and we continue to remind them through constant communications on what those are, so that they keep safe. The second element is well-being, and again, my colleagues have mentioned some of those things. We have a very active program of wellbeing in Irving Mitchell anyway in pre-coronavirus circumstances. So we are dialing up all of that support. We have, a lot of toolkits, a lot of communication that is going to our colleagues in terms of how to maintain that mental health, that physical health and well-being. And we are activating and reminding our colleagues about all of the good things that we have, our mental health champions. We have, our employee scheme, employee assistance scheme. We are also sharing among ourselves in our website, wellbeing website. We communicate and we share colleague stories, how they're coping. So again, very much using that human touch that is part of our DNA, as part of our culture of supporting each other, how colleagues are coping with it. We very much focus on being there for our colleagues. We have a very active helpline, which is part of my team. The People Services helpline is constantly in dialogue with colleagues, answering the questions, answering the questions from our line managers as well. And we are very much, obviously, very focused on the small group of risk colleagues and the shield colleagues as well, so that we are constantly in touch with them and they don't feel isolated, they feel supported and connected. So those are some of the things that we're doing for our colleagues. We're doing a lot of stuff as well for our leaders. If I just mention briefly as well, we are introducing further training and development for our leaders. We are helping them to, by running modules, training modules on a website and e-learning basis to help them manage remote and virtual teams, and they, to support them to continue to do that, working from home. And then we also very much actively involved in our communities and supporting our communities, and it's been amazing to see the response from our colleagues in terms of volunteering in response to the NHS request for volunteers. And we've done that by ensuring that they are absolutely certain about the safety conditions that the government is basically sharing with us. So those are kind of the things we're doing, Vicky.
It feels to me, I think, as a leader in our business and a member of our Irving Mitchell team, that, where we had a strength already in looking after our clients' well-being and mental health, we've had a huge spotlight put on that, and all the things you're talking about enhanced training specifically on these issues, thinking really hard about communication methods practically within the business. So doing that through different channels, so it might be webinars, it may be Zoom meetings, phone calls, obviously the normal kind of cascade emails, but trying to also get some kind of collaboration where people can also feed back in. So sharing stories has been good. We've had examples of teams doing pub quizzes. We've had examples of sort of pizza nights, and teams finding really innovative ways to just keep connected. And I think I've been really astounded by the resilience of our people, which I think has really helped to kind of create that environment in which communication has been difficult, but it's actually been quite surprising to see the number of innovative ways that people have used. It would be great just to get, just as a sort of case study, your own personal reflections, if you're happy to share those as a leader in this current crisis. I think many of the people on this call will be leading other people through this, and we're all grappling with that journey to this new normal, post-COVID, to use Zara's phrase. What are your personal reflections? How's it felt for you? There are lots of HR managers, directors on this call. We know that from the invitee list. What sort of things have you learned personally from this that you think might be able to help others?
Sure. Thank you for that. It's a very good question, and one that we all is live in everybody's mind. So we've seen a lot of changes, as you are referring to, more true collaboration, enhanced communication, practices that are more agile in terms of, teams assembling themselves as a squad throughout the organization, our leaders dialing up the communication with their teams like Zara was talking about, daily contact in a very personable and very empathetic way to create that inclusiveness and the acceleration and adoption of very smart working practices. So the main reflections for me, I would say three. The first one is about what people are starting to call radical self-acceptance, for a better word. So that's sort of, thinking that we are doing really difficult things in impossible circumstances, and that is not the time for perfection. It's the time for accepting, everything about ourselves, everything about our current circumstances, and about the difficulties that we're facing, without rejection, without blame, without pushback. So that sort of preservation and acceptance, absolute radical acceptance of ourselves, our self-acceptance. The second thing, I think is about, chunking big problems. It's about staying in control. So how do we face the big problems, the day-to-day problems, and how do we focus on the things that we can control, chunk the big issues into, bite-size issues that we can get our head around and our arms around, so that we remain in control, we support each other, we help each other. I was called myself with my team this morning, and that's what they were saying, Susan, I'm living the day bit at a bit, time at a time and day at a time, just little by little, and really keeping control of all of the things that I need to manage. And the third thing, as well as that sort of staying in control, the third thing will be about focusing on the positives. We are all being inundated through all of these difficult, sad stories, sad news. It's terrible times, really. So finding the opportunity to also identify the positive learnings and the things that are positive. And we've talked about that empowerment of teams, the acceleration of very smart working practices. And one thing as well that is emerging, which I'm noticing, I'm sure all of you are noticing, which is a new economy, an economy that is very much focused on togetherness and a sense of community. So focusing on those positives, I think is a critical thing. So self-acceptance, keeping control of the day and everything we're doing, and that keeping an eye for the positive things that are emerging through these terrible, terrible times, Vicky, I would say, are my three self.
Yeah, that's great. I was just trying to reflect whether I've achieved any one of those three. I'm partly on the way to most of them, I think. And I think the positive focus is, again, a theme that's emerged here. It's very difficult to see some positives when we're talking about serious topics like furloughing, restructuring teams, changing people's lives, having all the consequences Zara's talked about on the family and us personally and our own mental well-being. But I think, certainly as a business, we are seeing some positives in terms of changing the ways we work and actually having to empower, something we talked about a lot, very important, but actually suddenly having to just do that because people are remote and disparate, and we are having to let them make some decisions and get on with things themselves. And I think one of the challenges for all of us as business leaders and coming out of this and employees in terms of how we work is perhaps resisting going back to the old way and perhaps really trying to note at this time what we are doing well, because there's a lot we're doing well, and enhancing that as we go forward and not being tempted to sort of retreat back into perhaps some less efficient ways that we had before. So I think there will be some positives that come out of this. So thank you for that. It's very helpful. I hope it will be helpful for the people on the webinar to just hear that absolutely from the heart as a leader right at the forefront of the current crisis. I think we have got time just to go back to some Q&As, I think, with the panel, if we may. There were a list of questions, and I've had a couple come through as well live as we've been going through. So we'll try and deal with some of those. Sibylla, I think you are going to get the lion's share because they are predominantly furloughing. If we don't manage to answer an issue or you don't feel we've covered it adequately, at the end we will refer you to our client hub, where we are collating all of our know-how about the COVID-19 crisis and our learning for you to access. And also there'll be an opportunity via a dedicated email to submit any questions at a later date. If we just go through the questions that we had received in, and I think, Sibylla, the first one is probably for you. We talked earlier about the fact that an employee can come off furlough and go back on. I think we covered that question. And I think there's a follow-up to that was just very much, if they do that, is each block got to be a minimum of 3 weeks? Or once you've done a 3 week, can you change that? Once you've done a minimum of 3, could you have smaller blocks thereafter? Or is it always a minimum of a 3 week block if you're coming off and on in this period that we've been given?
Yeah, thank you, Vicky. Our understanding is that the blocks have to be in 3 weeks. So it's not that you get through the 3 weeks first and then you can do smaller blocks. That we don't think is possible. Okay. I think maybe in that context, if I just quickly mention there are questions as to whether one can ask people to go on holiday while being furloughed.
Yep.
And the answer to that is no. So it either has to be furloughing or holidays. But what is possible then in that context is that someone goes on furlough, comes off the furlough after the 3 weeks, and then takes a period of holiday, or the other way around. Okay. That is a possibility. And I think then another question that arises in that context is how do I then calculate what's the holiday pay? Yeah. Is that based on the 80% or the 100%? Now from April this year, which we already have from 6th of April this year, the holiday pay is calculated based on the average earnings of the last 12 months. So that's something that, coming back to that, employment laws generally will apply. So unless there's legislation to the contrary, holiday pay should be calculated based on that.
And so thank you for that. And just on the holiday point, coming away from the furlough environment for a second, just with employees, one option for workers who perhaps have got less to do is that employers could require them to take some holiday during, or a sabbatical during this period. Presumably that's standard employment law. That would have to be an agreement with the employee. Are people thinking of those sorts of solutions, presumably?
Yes. So an employer can ask an employee to take holidays. The general rule there is that the employer has to give notice for that to happen. The notice has to be twice as long as the holiday that the employee is required to take. So, for example, if an employer wants an employee to take 1 week holiday, the employer should, based on general rules, give 2 weeks notice with regard to that. Now, I think as we discussed before, it is possible, of course, between employers and employees to agree that an employee should take holidays, and maybe with a shorter notice, as the one I've just described. It is, of course, also possible to agree with the employee to take a sabbatical, take other type of unpaid leave. All that is possible. But again, I would like to stress there that it's got to be by agreement. So an employer can't say to an employee, actually, now take a sabbatical, and by the way, it's not paid. If an employer does that, there is likely to be a breach of contract, and then an employee has rights as a consequence of that.
Usual remedies, yeah, okay. And just on that, Sibylla, sorry to press on you, but we had a very specific question about people. If we asked people to take a pay cut and they refuse to do that, whether that's a ground for dismissal. So, in these circumstances, you could absolutely envisage a scenario where we're not furloughing people, but we are saying, given reduced capacity, we would like you to take a pay cut, and asking employees to do that. And one could absolutely understand the situation where an employee might say, well, that's all very nice, but no, thank you. Is that a ground for dismissal? Is there anything the employer can do in that scenario?
My first answer to that is it depends, and we need to come back to the fact that general employment rules apply, and if we're talking about an employee who is protected against an unfair dismissal, that clearly needs to be taken into account. What an employer possibly could do is to terminate the current employment contract based on what's called some other substantial reason. So saying that for financial reasons it is no longer possible to employ the employee with that salary or based on the hours that has been agreed, and then offer a new contract with the new proposed terms, so with a reduced salary, reduced hours, and what have you. Now, what the employer, however, needs to bear in mind is to act reasonably, to follow procedures where required, and so on. So, again, general employment provisions and rules need to be taken into account. So, sorry, that's a longer answer to your question. So I think depending on the individual facts of the case, potentially the answer to your question is yes, but the employer needs to take the required steps to get there.
Yeah, I think being careful around all of that's good. And Zara, you talked about balancing the full-time work and the toddler or the child that needs educating and us taking on that extra hat as a teacher. There's been a question, I think probably for Sibylla, about whether employers have to make concessions, which we'll come on to, but is there anything in your area that you're seeing practically of how people are making that work? And then I think on to you to say, well, what kind of concessions as employers would we need to make, and as employees are we entitled to ask for, I suppose, is the other side of that coin. So Zara, in your area, anything practical you're seeing that people are doing?
I'll tell you one thing I saw, which was quite interesting. A couple who were massively struggling, shift working, their two different jobs in the house and managing the children. They're really, really struggling. And then what I wasn't aware of, and Sibylla, you can pick me up on if I've picked this up wrong, is that the one of them was able to volunteer for the furloughing. And they were like, you know what? We're going to get 80% of that income. I don't have to work. I can look after the kids. You work. We lose 20%, but our home life will be better, and we will manage and we will get through this better, because otherwise we're going to kill each other. So I heard that, and I just was like, wow.
If we can volunteer for furloughing, I think that's the question, because it could be a very good solution for some families, I suppose.
It is. Well, this particular family said, we're not going to come out of this really positively, and I was like, well, thank goodness for that. So, Sibylla, I don't know, is that right? Is that something I heard?
And yes, I think that's a very good point. That brings us to the question as to how, as an employer, would I select the employees who would be furloughed? I mean, an employee doesn't have a right to be furloughed. But I'm pretty sure that if an employee says to an employer, well, can I please be furloughed because otherwise I'm going to kill my husband or my wife, that's possibly something that the employer might want to take into account. I think generally when it comes to juggling childcare obligations or other caring obligations, I think we're coming back to how important it is for employers and employees to work together to communicate, and for both parties to be flexible. So yes, of course, it is possible to start work early in the morning or work later at night or to work over the weekends. Again, I think communication is key to work out a pattern that will work for both sides. There are, of course, family rights that employees have. I mean, for example, if someone has right to take parental leave, that can be taken up to 4 weeks a year. It is unpaid, though, so that might not be an option for every employee. But again, communicate. Both employer and employees communicate, talk about what works for both sides.
Okay, thank you. Look, I'm conscious of time. I think we've probably got time to do a couple more questions if we can keep the answers relatively brief. The first one's come through actually through the session, which is quite a specific technical one, Sibylla, on consideration in furlough or reduced wages agreements. And if we're relying on consideration being the fact that we won't make them redundant, what would we need to do to make sure that that's sound consideration for that agreement? that something you've been asked about?
That's a question actually that I haven't come across.
Okay.
The way we advise our clients is to produce a letter that explains the following to the employees, and to then in the letter ask the employees to agree to the various changes to the employment contract which the following brings with it.
Mm-hmm.
I think the question of is, do we have to show whether otherwise we would have to make we would have had to make the employees redundant? That question we've had more in the context of what will need to be shown in towards HMRC. So the HMRC are currently setting up this portal for employers to apply for the following grant. Now, what we don't know yet is what questions will be asked in that portal. So may there be, could there be a question saying, well, would you make this employee redundant if you didn't furlough them? That's something that we don't know, but those are questions that we have had in that context with, do we need to show that we,
okay.
Otherwise definitely.
We're not clear on that yet, but the portal might help once we start to see the types of questions that have been asked.
Yeah.
People get to apply for the grant.
Yeah.
That's helpful. I think last one maybe, well, there's so many good ones actually, and there's one come up on this, on the rules around carrying over holidays. We briefly touched on that. We could probably put something on our hub for that post this event. There was one just I think would be interesting for most people, someone who is shielded for 12 weeks, so they are high risk. Are we allowed as employers, or are they as employees allowed to continue to be paid, or can we switch them to sick pay, and would statutory sick pay be there? So I think that's the conflict between they can't come into work because they are shielded, but do we switch to a sick pay regime, or do we keep with their contractual pay in that period? Again, it's probably not clear yet, but what's our initial thinking on that, Sibylla?
People who have been advised to shield can be put on furlough,
Okay.
and the important difference there is to understand whether the employee has been formally advised to shield, or whether it's a question of being sick or self-isolating. Now, if people are self-isolating because they have symptoms, or because they live with someone who has symptoms or is caring for someone with symptoms, that's a sick pay question. But the shielding one, what we understand at the moment is that someone formally has been advised to shield, and these letters have gone out last weekend and over the last few days. Those employees can be put on the furlough scheme.
Okay, that's great. I think just with the interest of time, people have got busy lives. We'll stop the questions there. There are some more, which if we haven't got to your question, I apologise. We will answer that via our client hub, which you can just see that coming up now, I think, on your screens. We will send a link to that, and we will also set up a dedicated email, which is events@irwinmitchell.com. If you want to send questions there, you will have seen the profiles of our speaker panellists, and again, their personal emails are on that. So please feel free to contact any one of us direct if you would like some specific help, or if any of the topics you feel you would like us to expand on a little bit more. Just to conclude, I'm just going to ask the panel, Susanna, Andrew, is there anything else that you would like to add to the session? I think it's been enormously informative. I think the themes that have come up have been keeping in touch, change, communication, support for each other, and just really expanding our role as leaders, as employees, as employers, to thinking about that wider picture that each of us is battling with every day. That it's not just now about work, it's about work, home, family, and all of that coming together in a way that it's never, ever come together before. But were there any other observations from anybody on the panel, Andrew, Susanna?
So, Vicky, thank you. Just reinforcing what you said, and as leaders, maxing up on that personal connection with our colleagues, never ever before has been so important, that authenticity, that personal connection, and that empathy.
That's great. Thank you, Susanna. Well, I think that just remains to thank everybody who's joined us. We've had an enormous response to this. I suppose I'm not surprised because this is an area that's very uncertain at the moment. Hope we've given you some clarity. Appreciate in a session like this we can only touch the surface. Thank you to the panellists, to Sibylla, to Martin, to Zara, to Susanna, and also to Andrew for joining us and giving up their time this morning. We are going to do a regular slot at 11 o'clock every Thursday on different topics, probably initially COVID related, sort of thinking about different issues that we're seeing as a business ourselves, but also obviously as advisors to many individuals and businesses, clients and communities, and sharing some of that experience with you. If there are specific issues that you would like us to talk about, if you think could form a good topic for these events, please let us know. We're absolutely flexible and ready to think about that. Visit us via the hub to do that, or send those ideas and get any questions to the events@irwinmitchell.com email. So thank you everybody for joining us, and I hope you have a pleasant rest of the day, and hope to see you same time next week. Thank you very much.